Alright, Lego is back from a little break here, and we're going straight into a little project involving some CC Gallifreyan. The first thing I did in this project was to establish my framing, and I need a center point in this, so for this particular project I needed the shard outline. So that's what I did here, did a manual trace of that real quick, started to do some of the surrounding buildings, but then I figured, let's wait and see if I actually turns out that I need them, because I wasn't sure if I needed them at this point. So the shot's done. Then to get a more 3D effect, I started tracing some of the segments of the tower, some of the characteristic elements and the profile to eventually, in case I needed it, make some almost mosaic artwork of that. So that's what you're seeing me do right now, taking some eyeball measurements of the characteristic elements, and then, as you saw there, cut them into pieces, and then I'm going to individually color them in so that I get a 3D effect. I might use this later on, I might not, I'm not sure yet at this point, but it's a nice little, I guess, exercise in mosaic design at any rate. Yeah, so the project here is Doctor Who inspired, and for anyone who knows the role of the shot, it should be immediately apparent what's going on here, and it'll be even more obvious once I get to the detail work. But right now, what you're seeing on the left there is an outline of what I intend to do in broad terms. So this is my framing, the tower in the center, and now you can see I'm taking a generic motorcycle trace and putting that on there for obvious reasons. Now I don't really care about the details of the motorcyclist because it'll be too small to see anyway in detail. So just knowing that there is something vaguely shaped like a motorcycle there will be good enough. So having done that, it's time to actually take a look at the text. So I'm making some reminders for myself, trying to puzzle out the amount of segments I need and the amount of depth I need. So how many concentric lines, how many individual arcs am I going to need in order to pull this off? And at the same time, keeping in mind that the tower is straight in the center, so there are some segments here marked in yellow that I can't actually use because they would be inside the building. They would be obscured by the frame itself. So making a little off records, Tyler. So what I'm trying to do here is mark out the sections I can use, and then figure out if the remaining sections are enough. So I'm trying to find a balance between enough and not enough. And later on, I'll find out that I miscounted. So that'll be a problem for later. But for now, this is the guide grid that I made for myself here. So there is a grid at the top and a grid at the bottom. Now the grid at the bottom is the size it is because of two words in particular. I've marked them out in red off to the right there because those particular words contain more letters than anyone else. This particular style of CC is best used if you have a consistent number of letters in each word. So if everything is about the same length, it works the best. I couldn't do that here because I had two long words that takes up a lot more space than everything else. So that's why it looks a little just disjointed. But I'll figure it out and I'll make it pretty once I'm done, because then I'll have a better idea of how much space I actually take up and how I can play with that space. But that's what you're seeing me do, and I'm filling out the first letters here, and I'm starting counterclockwise because, well, there is a little bit of a precedent for that in CC. And you can see, of course, the guide on the right there that I'm using. It's a very simple language, and it's not strictly speaking meant to be used in this way, but I've done a similar project like this in the past with the timekeepers, and their syntax is very, very similar. So I've gotten away with it once, I'll probably get away with it again, as long as I'm staying sharp here in terms of letter placement and letter division. Now I'm going through the letters here counterclockwise, starting from the outside and going in, as is the usual CC procedure. And along the way, I'm using certain guidelines that I might have to cut away later. They're marked in yellow for now. I'm not sure if I'm going to use them or not, because on the one hand, I do like having something that radiates outwards from the center, but on the other hand, it might interfere with the actual text, and I don't want any ambiguity about what is a letter and what is not a letter. So I might decide to change that later on. But for now, these red sections mark out the end of the letter, so I know how much wasted space is actually left. Now, in terms of CC itself, there's not a lot to say that I haven't said already on some of my other projects. It's a bit limited in the amount of punctuation it has. It only has 6 different characters for punctuation. So I can't actually repeat the actual complete quote. I do have to leave a few punctuation marks out because there is no quotation marks in this system. There is an apostrophe, but it's meant as part of a word. And it would sound weird, and it would be out of place to use that as a quotation mark here. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, I am simply leaving out the quotation marks and having the reader figure it out for themselves. It still makes sense, but it's not. I do like to use the actual complete wording whenever I can. So that's a bummer on my part, but I really wanted to use this, and there's no real alternative to CC when it comes to this style. As I said earlier, I've used timekeepers before in a similar capacity, but that language has no punctuation whatsoever. There's only Latin characters, so it would be even less capable of doing this than what I'm currently using. So, looking at the bottom text here, I'm almost done with the raw text, and it's now time to remove a lot of the guidelines and the extra letters and lines that I don't really need, and make some of the things here a little bit prettier. Now you might see that I deleted a segment on the left side there, and that's because I miscounted. So I only needed 11 segments for this, and it turns out I had 12. So there's an awkward hole left on the left side there because I made a space for a word that isn't actually there, and I'll have to figure out later on how I want to deal with that. I could extend the lines down and just sort of fill it up with extra lines, but it also looks a bit stupid. So I'll see what I do there. For now, I'm removing the radiant lines. I decided I didn't want them, and found a spelling error. I need to fix that real quick. There we go. And now the art is making sure that every letter is distinctive from its neighbors, because I'm using a lot of arcs here that actually cross over into more than one word, and in order to make them readable from the outside and in, and being distinctive from each other, I need to have certain boundaries in place, implicit by the ending points of the arcs. So that's why I'm breaking everything up into smaller pieces. That's the simplest, or at least the intended way to make sure each letter is distinctive from its neighbors, at least where applicable. Now the last thing I'm doing here is making the punctuation work, and technically speaking this works out, even though there is some artistic license involved. It should be unambiguous at any rate. So I'm happy with that. Making the top text is a lot easier because there is no more than 4 words to a letter, and they're all between 3 and 4 words long. So it's very, very well designed for this particular script, and there's only 8 segments for 8 words. So I'll go through that in very short order here. A mix of thick and thin line widths for the characters as needed, and some of them are sharing arcs, which I will have to break up later. Now, what else can we talk about here? Let's talk a little bit about the end design here. So what I'm envisioning for the end project, I'll have 2 sentences radiating out from the actual shot tower itself, and it'll be a part of a conversation. So it doesn't really, strictly speaking, matter which one you start reading, because there's no real way of knowing whether or not you're supposed to read from the top and go to the bottom text, or start from the bottom and go to the top. It doesn't really matter, because in this case you can read it either way, and either way you read it will be a response to the other one. So I'm not too concerned about that. Strictly speaking, in my head, I would read it from the bottom to top, because I'm applying Sherman Gallifreyan rules, and there is a precedent for doing counterclockwise from the bottom in CC. So, but strictly speaking, it doesn't really matter. You'll get the same. You'll get the result of the text either way, whether you start from the top or the bottom. Now, having finished with the top text here, I am simply doing the cutting for separating the letters from the neighbors, and then I will remove the red guide marks there, and we'll have our complete text, hopefully. At this point, I am pretty sure about 3 hours have gone by, and that's not too shabby. I'm just doing a quick little reading test there. Now I am adjusting some of the thicknesses for the letters that don't matter. Some of the thicknesses matter, some of them don't, and it's a little bit of an artwork figuring out which is which. So those were purely decorational. Now I'm taking a copy of the shot tower because I want to make a black and white copy first. I tend to do that, and this time I wanted the grayscaling to be more uniform. So I didn't want all the segments for this first part. I just want a simpler version. So that's what I did. But I also wanted to see if I could add some examples, some detail either way. And I took a copy of the actual photograph, made a trace of that to see if I could incorporate some two-tone colors. And having done that a little bit, I tried to see if that added anything, or if it was just too much noise. And I decided that this was too much noise. It didn't really add anything. I was better off with just the totally black silhouette. So that's what I ended up doing. And at this stage, I am doing a final check of the punctuation and the actual text, going through all the letters in order, making sure that what I read was my intention. And I did catch one mistake right there. So making sure that was the only place that happened, I went along, and after I was done with my proofread, I decided to address the awkward hole on the left, taking a building there and squashing it down to fill out that space. Worked out pretty okay, no one can tell me otherwise. And now I'm just making some subtle adjustments to the actual silhouette there, all the while knowing that I don't really care about it, because at the scale we are talking about here, you won't be able to see anything at all about the actual little guy there. So the only thing I'm really concerned about is I had this idea maybe of doing a flare just to subtly point the attention of the reader towards this little figure, and I tried to see if I could make that work without it being outrageously overscaled or out of place. So I tried playing around with that a little bit, but no, it did not work out at all. I would need a lens flare that was way more intrusive and just out of place than what I was prepared to work with. So no, I would have to make do with the silhouette itself. Now, the last thing I did here was make some simple adjustments to some of the pointing arcs and lines, making some simple taperings just to sort of round that off. Most of this text is sharp cornered, so that's okay on my part. I don't really care. But having done that, it's now time to actually see if I can make a color version of this. So I brought back the detail work. I wanted to see some windows. I wanted to see some reflections. I wanted to see if I could make the building look a little livelier. And this is daylight, so I am having to work a little bit with some shadows to sell the effect that this is actually a dude on the side of a skyscraper driving upwards. And so that's what I'm doing here before finalizing the actual text, both top and bottom. I had no plans whatsoever for the color schemes here, so I made them up on the fly. Some green at the top to signify the speaker of that text, and then some gold at the bottom to contrast. I really didn't go too much detail about this. It was a pretty simple color scheme, just making sure that it can be read by applying a little bit of shadow. Not too much, nothing too intrusive, just a little bit to offset it. And then I just made a few clouds just for atmosphere. And I love making clouds. They look really good and they're really, really easy to make. So having done that, I decided that the background was too boring. So I made a mesh gradient, which is always the solution when you need complicated color work over a large area. And I decided to make the top of the shot give off a little extra color there for plot reasons. And at the same time, I tried to work a little bit more with the little man there. And I ended up actually making a large scale shadow to really subtly point out that he is right here and he's taking up space and he's actually on the building itself. So making some little color work there made that pretty believable at this scale. I was not too concerned about that. A little bit of a different color at the bottom. Just a little hint of something else. And there we have it. That's pretty much the project right there, with the little conversation there and the very stunning, iconic shot there with the motorcyclist going up. I won't spoil any more than that, but I will say that this is the finished project, and I'm really happy with it. And I will see you later. Thank you for watching.